A medical device designed to keep a human heart beating does not simply turn off on its own in the dead of night. The digital footprint stopped dead at 2:30 in the morning. The initial investigation was spearheaded by Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos and his local deputies. According to multiple reports and a damning insider interview, the initial response team was woefully inexperienced in handling a major complex homicide of this magnitude. The crucial first hours known in law enforcement as the golden hour were allegedly squandered through a series of devastating missteps. When dealing with a crime scene that has been intentionally scrubbed of digital evidence, the physical environment is the only remaining canvas. Every footprint, every displaced pebble, and every microscopic fiber becomes a critical piece of the puzzle. But reports suggest that the local team inadvertently trampled through the scene, compromising the delicate forensic integrity of the porch and the surrounding property. They were looking for obvious signs like a broken window or a dropped weapon, completely missing the subtle, terrifying reality of a technologically advanced abduction. The frustration surrounding the local response is palpable. The local team treated the scene like a standard missing persons incident for far too long, failing to recognize the extreme sophistication of the masked individual. They failed to immediately lock down the wider perimeter, allowing crucial hours to pass while the perpetrator put miles between himself and the Catalina Foothills. A pacemaker is essentially a lifeline that records every heartbeat, every minor flutter, and every dangerous anomaly. The local authorities were essentially bringing a magnifying glass to a crime scene that required an electron microscope. Their fundamental lack of experience with signal jammers, digital evasion, and organized, targeted abductions left them stumbling in the dark while the trail grew colder by the second. The insider accounts paint a picture of chaos and confusion during those critical early hours. Important protocols were allegedly bypassed, and the scene was not secured with the ironclad discipline required for a major federal level investigation. This systemic failure at the local level allowed the perfect crime to remain perfect for far too long. The local deputies simply did not have the training or the resources to hunt a ghost who could erase camera feeds and manipulate digital networks. As the sun rose higher on that Sunday, the bitter reality set in. The local police had hit a massive brick wall. They had the blood, they had the fragmented video of the masked man, and they had a missing. When it goes completely dark, it means the device is either totally destroyed or taken. 84-year-old woman. But they had absolutely no idea how to connect the dots. The crime was too big, too smart, and too ruthless for the Pima County team to unravel on their own. The botched initial response is a glaring systemic failure that forced the investigation into a desperate corner. It became brutally clear that the local badge was not enough. To catch a predator who operates in the digital shadows and leaves no trace, the investigation needed to evolve immediately. The local failures forced a necessary escalation. It was time to bring in the heavy artillery. It was time for the federal government to step into the desert and start hunting. The investigation was forced to pivot outward from the compromised property line and gaze into the vast, unforgiving expanse of the surrounding wilderness. The arid landscape bordering the community is not merely empty space, but a hostile environment that actively consumes secrets and destroys delicate physical materials. Search and rescue teams alongside desperate volunteers formed massive grids to comb through the punishing terrain under the sweltering sun, every so far out of range that the base station can no longer hear its digital cry for help. Cactus Shadow and Dry Wash was scrutinized with a sense of mounting dread because everyone understood what looking in the wilderness truly meant. The focus shifted entirely from a residential perimeter to a massive outdoor theater where the elements themselves were acting as accomplices to the crime. Days bled into one another as the relentless heat and blowing sand threatened to erase whatever tiny physical anomalies the perpetrator might have carelessly left behind in their frantic retreat. But the desert, despite its vastness, cannot completely swallow human error. Exactly 2 miles away from the neatly manicured lawns of the victim, the sprawling search grid finally yielded a terrifying physical breakthrough. Nestled among the coarse brush and sun-baked rocks, searchers spotted an item that emphatically did not belong in the natural environment. It was a solitary glove discarded in the dirt. Finding isolated articles of clothing in a remote area is often the grim turning point in any missing persons protocol, because it signifies a rapid, chaotic movement or a struggle far removed from the initial point of contact. This singular piece of data is the only honest witness in a case shrouded in absolute shadows. This was no longer just a theory about someone fleeing the scene, but a physical breadcrumb dropped along a dark and desperate escape route. And the discoveries did not end with the solitary hand covering. According to verified reports from News Nation and the International Business Times, investigators also secured a crucial hair sample from the immediate vicinity. This organic material presented a profound glimmer of hope, but it also introduced a staggering new complication for the overwhelmed regional authorities. The intense ultraviolet radiation and the abrasive wind had already begun the process of degrading the biological integrity of these fragile items. Traditional forensic laboratories at the municipal level are often ill-equipped to handle highly compromised environmental samples. Standard swabbing and basic comparative analysis simply would not work on evidence that had been baking in the harsh elements. The physical items were safely bagged and cataloged, but they essentially remained mute. The local forensic technicians could only examine the surface level attributes of the fabric and the macroscopic properties of the biological material, which offered zero actionable leads. They could determine the color and the basic material of the synthetic fabric, but they could not. It tells us exactly when the terror truly began. Peer deep enough into the woven threads to extract the hidden biological identity of the wearer. The suspect had banked on the sheer brutality of the wilderness to act as a natural incinerator for any mistakes left behind. The heat, the wind, and the scavengers form a biological disposal system that works around the clock to break down cellular structures and destroy molecular bonds. The perpetrator knew that every passing hour out in the wasteland acted as a shield diminishing the chances of a standard laboratory ever pulling a usable profile from the discarded items. The tension hung heavy over the command center as they realized that without a massive leap in scientific methodology, the trail would remain permanently frozen in the sand. The investigation was staring into an abyss of degraded evidence and failing momentum. The physical distance of 2 miles was a testament to the aggressive nature of the extraction, but it also highlighted the sheer physical exertion required by the assailant to navigate that specific terrain in the pitch black. The local police were initially focused on the morning hours, but the real crime happened in the pitch black isolation of the early morning. The presence of the glove raised immediate and horrifying questions about the sequence of events that unfolded after the property line was breached. Was the item torn off in a violent struggle under the starlight, or simply discarded as the attacker made a hasty retreat to a hidden vehicle? The narrative of the night was slowly coming into a sharper, terrifying focus, but the ultimate truth was trapped inside the microscopic fibers and cellular structures of the recovered items. The evidence was slowly dying in the evidence lockers while the clock continued to run. The situation demanded an immediate escalation to a higher authority capable of bypassing the environmental damage inflicted on the clues. Who do you think the solitary glove belongs to, and what sequence of events led to it being dropped exactly 2 miles into in the wasteland? So leave your detailed predictions in the comments below while we push forward into the federal response. The absolute scientific standstill at the county level triggered a necessary and massive shift in jurisdiction. In April, the Federal Bureau of Investigation officially absorbed the case, bringing the full staggering weight of the national laboratory system down upon the silent evidence. Who comes for an elderly woman in the middle of the night, and who knows exactly how to silence the invisible alarms? The arrival of the federal agents fundamentally changed the trajectory of the hunt, because they did not just bring fresh personnel, they brought revolutionary analytical weaponry. The federal laboratory does not rely on the outdated methodologies that failed the local technicians. According to detailed reporting from News Nation and the Hindustan Times, the federal scientists deployed a cutting-edge technique known as advanced genomic sequencing directly onto the weathered glove and the degraded biological material. This is not your standard swabbing and matching process seen in typical localized casework. Genomic sequencing is a breathtakingly complex procedure that can reconstruct a complete genetic profile from the most heavily damaged and fragmented cellular remains. It reads the biological data on a molecular level, piecing together shattered strands of genetic code like a microscopic jigsaw puzzle until a high-resolution image of the donor emerges from the chemical static. The federal experts bypass the environmental damage entirely by diving deeper into the cellular architecture than the sun or the wind could ever reach. The fabric of the glove, which had remained stubbornly silent in the county locker, was now being systematically. The complete silence of that disconnected pacemaker is the loudest and most terrifying piece of evidence we have. Interrogated by machines capable of reading the invisible signature of human sweat and shedding skin cells. The isolated hair strand was subjected to a rigorous mitochondrial analysis designed to trace maternal lineage and lock down a definitive familial origin, regardless of its time spent baking in the desert. This was the turning point where the raw, unfeeling power of modern science began to aggressively dismantle the careful preparations of the suspect. The advanced federal techniques act as a time machine, dragging the hidden biological reality of that chaotic night out of the shadows and placing it directly beneath the blinding fluorescent lights of the laboratory. The sequencing process, does not just offer a name, it provides a devastatingly precise anchor point that completely reshapes our understanding of the geographic movement. By extracting viable data from the items found precisely 2 miles out, the federal team effectively mapped the physical trajectory of the suspect after the digital blackout. The gap in the timeline was no longer a vast, terrifying void, but a measurable path of travel. The science proved that the perpetrator did not simply vanish into thin air, but moved aggressively through. It is a digital death knell that marks the exact moment a life was violently uprooted from a quiet and secure neighborhood setting, a specific corridor of the landscape, leaving a microscopic trail of their own biological ruin in their wake. The technology strips away the anonymity that the attacker relied upon, turning their own microscopic shedding into the ultimate undeniable witness against them. The federal intervention transformed a cold, stagnant mystery into a highly active, scientifically driven manhunt that is currently narrowing its focus with terrifying precision. The sheer intellectual triumph of reconstructing a ghost from a few damaged cells found in the dirt represents a monumental shift in the balance of power. The assailant thought they were smarter than the system by erasing the digital world, but they failed to account for the relentless, microscopic scrutiny of the federal government. The genomic sequencing is rapidly building an undeniable biological cage around the suspect, and the walls are closing in by the minute. Every single rotation of the centrifuge and every line of processed genetic code represents another nail being hammered into the coffin of the perpetrator. The suspect likely continues to live their life under the false assumption that the harsh environment successfully incinerated their mistakes. They probably watch the news believing that the degraded state of the recovered items guarantees their perpetual freedom. At exactly 2:30 in the morning, a digital pulse severed its connection to the outside world. This is the timeline break. The exact second the world as this family knew it ended forever. But the invisible federal machinery is churning relentlessly through the night, turning invisible biological markers into a concrete, undeniable truth. The gap between the digital blackout and the physical wasteland has been successfully bridged by the sheer force of technological innovation. The timeline is no longer a disjointed series of chaotic events, but a solid, verifiable chain of evidence anchored by the indisputable reality of molecular biology. The federal escalation has effectively cornered a phantom, and the culmination of this scientific endeavor will inevitably result in a devastating revelation. If you want to be the very first to know when the final laboratory results drop and the absolute identity of the perpetrator is officially confirmed, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now so you do not miss a single update. The synthesis of the new scientific data with the established physical anomalies creates a horrifyingly clear picture of a meticulously orchestrated nightmare. We can now look back at the entire sequence of events not as a collection of random tragedies, but as a singular, continuous mechanism of violence. The terrifying reality is that the silence of the residential street was never peaceful, but rather the active sound of a trap being expertly sprung. The perpetrator moved through the darkness with a chilling confidence, relying heavily on technological suppression to maintain total operational secrecy. The reality of an 84-year-old body is that it is fragile and requires constant, meticulous maintenance. The immediate severing of the electronic lifelines was a brilliant, if deeply malicious strategy to isolate the target from any possible municipal rescue. But the brilliant digital execution was ultimately betrayed by the sloppy physical realities of human exertion. Carrying out an extraction of a fragile individual requires chaotic, forceful movement, and that inherently volatile action is what generated the blood evidence and forced the rapid retreat into the untamed wilderness. The suspect pushed outward into the brush, believing the vastness of the terrain would swallow their frantic mistakes. They discarded items along the route, operating under the assumption that local municipal capabilities would never be able to pry the truth from sun-baked materials. The narrative transforms from a story about a perfect vanishing act into a stark lesson about the inevitability of forensic discovery. The federal scientific intervention has effectively built a solid bridge over the massive gaps in the original municipal theory. The authorities no longer have to guess about the physical direction of the escape or the nature of the struggle, because the molecular evidence has drawn a bright red line across the map. Nancy Guthrie was not a woman who could simply wander off into the rugged terrain on a whim. The sheer level of planning required to execute the digital blackout strongly suggests a perpetrator who possessed a terrifying blend of technical knowledge and deep physical malice. This profile drastically narrows the pool of potential suspects, pushing the investigation away from random opportunistic drifters and directly toward individuals with specific, specialized backgrounds. The authorities are no longer searching blindly in the dark, but are instead hunting a very specific silhouette illuminated by advanced genetic markers. The trap that was set for the victim has now reversed its polarity and is slowly closing around the person who designed it. The physical evidence, originally deemed too damaged to speak, is now screaming a specific biological truth directly into the ears of the federal investigators. The entire case rests on a knife edge of anticipation as the complex laboratory processes near their final definitive stages. The massive puzzle has been assembled piece by piece, revealing a terrifying image of organized predatory behavior. Yet, despite the monumental scientific strides and the complete reconstruction of the physical timeline, the most crucial element of the narrative remains agonizingly out of reach. We know the exact methodology of the digital erasure. We know the precise geographic path of the chaotic retreat, and we possess the very biological blueprint of the attacker. She had significant mobility issues and was entirely dependent on daily medication alongside the pacemaker that regulated her failing heart. But the final translation of that microscopic blueprint into a recognizable human face has yet to occur. The investigation stands at the absolute precipice of a monumental breakthrough, waiting for the final string of data to align. The suspect is out there existing in the quiet, liminal space between committing the perfect crime and facing the absolute ruin of a federal indictment. They are breathing the same air and walking the same streets, completely unaware that their own cellular debris is actively testifying against them in a secure laboratory setting. The agonizing wait for the final laboratory confirmation is the last remaining hurdle in a case defined by staggering delays and profound systemic complications. The tension is no longer about whether the authorities have the evidence, but simply about when the internal machinery of the justice system will finally release the name. The net has been cast, the science has spoken, and the final piece of the puzzle is currently suspended in a state of terrifying anticipation. The entire architecture of the mystery has been laid bare, leaving only one monumental question echoing in the silence. According to confirmed reports from the FBI and multiple news outlets, she lived a quiet life that was heavily structured around her physical limitations. Moving beyond the specific tragedy of this timeline, what this case teaches us about the fragility of local justice is deeply alarming. We are witnessing a profound and terrifying evolution in predatory behavior, where sophisticated offenders are actively weaponizing the digital landscape against the fundamental concept of community safety. The purposeful utilization of localized signal interference demonstrates that the criminal element is outpacing the standard operational protocols of municipal law enforcement. When regional deputies respond to a crisis, they are trained to secure physical perimeters and canvass for human witnesses. But they are completely blind to the invisible electronic warfare happening right above their heads. This massive systemic failure highlights a dangerous gap in fundamental police training across the nation. Conversely, this investigation also illuminates the incredible forensic value of the Internet of Things within our most vulnerable populations. Devices designed strictly for internal medical monitoring are unintentionally transforming into the ultimate impartial witnesses to violent crime. A medical implant cannot be intimidated, coerced, or forced to lie on a police report. It simply records the absolute biological truth, marking the exact minute a physiological baseline is violently interrupted. The idea that she would voluntarily leave her home in the Catalina Foothills without her necessary medical supplies is a physical impossibility. These digital black boxes provide a level of unshakable timeline accuracy that human memory can never hope to achieve. The intersection of these two concepts paints a stark picture of the modern true crime landscape. While local law enforcement struggles to comprehend the sheer technical audacity of organized predators, the silent, passive data generated by our own medical dependencies is stepping up to fill the vast investigative void. The justice system is slowly learning to listen to the microscopic and the digital, because the human element alone is simply no longer enough to secure a reliable conviction. The future of investigation lies strictly within these invisible frequencies. Somewhere in a secure, highly illuminated federal laboratory, a sequencing machine is quietly humming through the final sets of damaged genetic data extracted from a solitary fabric hand covering found baking in the dirt. The overwhelming vastness of the surrounding wilderness could not keep the deepest, darkest secrets of that night buried forever. We have to look closely at the environment she inhabited to understand the absolute anomaly of her disappearance. The immense silence of the hostile desert environment is rapidly preparing to shatter under the immense weight of an incoming federal indictment. When that highly anticipated DNA profile is finally finalized and released to the public, will the name belong to a completely unknown drifter who simply vanished back into the night, or will it reveal a shockingly familiar face that has been quietly standing right on the periphery of the crowd this entire time? The meticulous preparations, the digital interference, and the brutal extraction into the Wasteland will all be completely undone by a few microscopic cells left behind in the panic. Keep your eyes firmly fixed on the unfolding forensic evidence, because the absolute truth is never truly lost. It is merely waiting for the right science to finally uncover it. I am Liam, and this investigation is far from over. Stay in the shadows. Her home was a sanctuary designed for comfort and safety, not a place of sudden chaotic departures. On the 31st of January 2026, the evening progressed just like any other quiet weekend night. At 9:50 at night, her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, dropped her off at her residence. According to the International Business Times, a pacemaker belonging to an elderly woman mysteriously, according to confirmed sources, he was the last known person to see her alive as she walked through her front door. The scene was perfectly ordinary. The house was locked, the lights were managed, and she was left in the presumed safety of her own private space. But that isolation in the wealthy suburb is a double-edged sword. The sprawling properties and large distances between neighbors create a serene environment, but they also create dangerous blind spots. For an 84-year-old woman living alone with severe physical limitations, that quiet isolation translates directly into extreme vulnerability. She could not fight back against a sudden intrusion, and she certainly could not traverse the harsh, unforgiving desert landscape that surrounds the area on her own 2 feet. Every single physical fact about her condition points to one terrifying conclusion. Any movement away from that house required the active, forceful intervention of another human being. The silence of the house after 9:50 at night was not the silence of a peaceful, disconnected from its mobile relay station, leaving behind nothing but a chilling digital silence, evening, but rather the quiet incubation of a meticulously planned intrusion. The environment was ripe for exploitation by someone who understood her exact vulnerabilities. As the hours ticked past midnight, the sanctuary of her home slowly transformed into a trap. The very walls meant to keep her safe became the boundaries of a silent nightmare, where her inability to flee or fight made her the perfect target. The tension in that house was entirely silent, but overwhelmingly real. The morning of the 1st of February brought the first cracks in the facade of normality. Sunday mornings for Nancy Guthrie were highly predictable and centered around her faith. When she failed to log into her scheduled online church service, the immediate family knew instantly that something was terribly wrong. This was not a simple oversight or a forgotten appointment for a woman whose life was ruled by strict routines. The absence was a screaming red flag that prompted an immediate panic and a frantic rush to the Catalina Foothills property. This was not a mechanical failure or a simple battery issue. The initial sweep of the house revealed an eerie stillness, but it was the exterior that held the first violent truth. Right there on the front porch lay a chilling discovery. A visible, stark stain of blood marring the concrete surface. The police were called and the area was cordoned off as the sickening reality began to set in. Subsequent DNA testing confirmed the absolute worst fears of everyone involved. The blood belonged to Nancy Guthrie. The discovery of the blood instantly shattered any lingering hope of a medical emergency or a simple wandering incident. Blood on the porch meant a physical altercation, a struggle right at the threshold of her supposed sanctuary. It meant that whoever came for her met her at the door or dragged her out through it. The timeline between the 9:50 drop-off and the morning discovery was a massive, terrifying void filled only by that single crimson stain. The family stood in horror as the local authorities began to document the grim scene. This was a precise and calculated extraction that went completely unnoticed by the sleeping neighborhood. Every drop of blood spoke volumes about the violence that had occurred in the dead of night. It was a clear, undeniable indicator of a violent abduction. The questions immediately began to spiral out of control. Why was there blood on the outside of the house? Did she open the door for someone she knew? Or was she ambushed the moment she stepped outside for an unknown reason? The porch, which should have been a welcoming entryway, was now the center for a brutal crime. The blood evidence transformed the missing persons case into a desperate homicide investigation within a matter of minutes. The local authorities were now racing against a clock that had already been ticking for hours in the dark. The frantic energy of the morning stood in sharp contrast to the cold, calculated silence of the night before. The family was left grappling with the sudden, violent void where their mother and grandmother used to be. We are looking at a timeline that defies all conventional logic, and a crime scene that seemingly vanished into the cold desert air. The physical evidence on the porch was the first tangible piece of a puzzle that would soon prove to be vastly more complex and terrifying than anyone on the scene could have possibly imagined. The blood was just the opening statement of a narrative written in absolute terror. The blood was the physical aftermath, but the digital eyes of the house captured the architect of the nightmare. When investigators pulled the footage from the doorbell camera, they did not find a frantic relative or a confused neighbor. They found a phantom. The footage revealed a masked individual moving with chilling purpose in the early hours of the 1st of February. The suspect was a male estimated to be between 5'9" and 5'10" tall, carrying a distinct black 25-liter backpack. He did not stumble onto the porch by accident. He approached with the calm, deliberate movements of someone executing a well-rehearsed plan. The camera captured his chilling presence before he reached up and actively tampered with the security device, blinding the digital witness to the horrors that followed. If you want to look past the sensational headlines and examine the cold, hard forensic reality, step into shadows. This was no ordinary burglary gone wrong. This was a targeted surgical strike by a predator who understood exactly how to dismantle the security systems. According to forensic experts speaking on News Nation, it is heavily alleged that the perpetrator utilized a highly sophisticated signal jammer during the attack. This theory explains the total catastrophic failure of the surrounding security networks and the deafening silence of the digital environment. The jammer would have effectively created an electronic dead zone, severing all communications and blinding every camera in the vicinity. If you want to dive deeper into the terrifying technology used to erase this crime scene, hit that subscribe button right now, because the rabbit hole only gets darker. The use of a signal jammer elevates this crime from a local tragedy to a masterclass in forensic evasion. It explains why the only signal that escaped the house was the abrupt death of the pacemaker at 2:30 in the morning. The masked individual did not just take a person, he actively erased the crime as it was happening. with Liam, where we do not do rumors, but strictly follow the evidence. So subscribe now to join the investigation. The 25-liter backpack he carried was likely not for stolen goods, but for the very tools needed to execute this digital blackout. The level of preparation is staggering and deeply unsettling. He knew the layout, he knew the cameras, and he allegedly brought military-grade technology to ensure his absolute invisibility. The footage of his masked face leaning in to sever the camera feed is a portrait of pure, unadulterated malice. He left behind no digital footprint, no dropped cell phone pings, and no wide-angle shots of a getaway vehicle. He created a perfect vacuum. But even the most brilliant digital ghosts leave a trace in the physical world. While he was busy erasing the electronic memory of the night, he made a critical physical error that the local authorities were entirely unequipped to find or comprehend. The digital silence was deafening, but the physical evidence was waiting to scream. The complexity of the crime scene required an immediate surgical response from law enforcement, but that is tragically not what happened.